Elon Musk had decided that he wanted to appear like an ordinary person that day. After a few hours of walking, he left the luxury cars and eye-kicking drivers aside and entered a small coffee shop in a shopping mall, accompanied by his bodyguards. He ordered a plain espresso to relieve the tiredness of the day and settled at a table next to the large window in the corner of the shop. The crowd around him seemed to notice Elon's presence, but most of them were content to just glance from afar. While the security team carefully scanned the entrances and exits of the venue, Elon focused on his coffee, watching the daily rush of the people around him as the hot steam of the coffee slowly rose into the air gave him a momentary sense of peace. At that very moment, the door of the shop opened violently, and the interior suddenly became lively. A young man in a black hoodie and heavy metal accessories entered, talking heatedly on the phone. The young man's voice echoed in the shop, disturbing the peace of the people sitting there. Although one of the employees tried to control the situation shyly, the young man could not control his anger and rising voice. Elon Musk took another sip of his coffee, but it didn't taste as pleasant anymore. The emo teenager's loud, argumentative phone call was starting to irritate everyone nearby. One of Elon's bodyguards leaned in slightly and asked, "Sir, would you like us to step in?" Elon raised his hand dismissively. No, the fun is just beginning," he said, continuing to observe the teenager's animated behavior. The teenager finally hung up the phone, but made sure to shoot challenging glances over his glasses at everyone around. His hands rested on the table, the metal rings on his fingers catching the light and drawing even more attention. Adjusting his black hoodie, he narrowed his eyes at Elon and said, "Is there a problem, old man?" His tone was dripping with sarcasm. Elon set his coffee down, stood up, and walked toward the teenager's table. He expected the young man to feel intimidated by the presence of his bodyguards, but the teenager remained seated with the same nonchalant attitude. "No problem," Elon said, slipping his hands into his pockets. "But I have to say, this style is quite a poor choice." The teenager raised his eyebrows and let out a mocking laugh. A poor choice? Looks like rich guys don't need to understand fashion, huh? Elon tilted his head slightly. No, this isn't about fashion. It's more about this dramatic, dark aesthetic. Who hurt you this much? The teenager's irritation was growing. This is my way of expressing myself. Dark and rebellious. Guys like you in suits wouldn't get it. Elon stared directly into the teenager's eyes. Rebellious? How exactly does wearing a black hoodie disrupt the system? Explain that to me. The teenager opened his mouth to reply, but Elon continued. I built a system, okay? Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, those are systems. But you, wearing black and yelling in a coffee shop, that's your idea of rebellion? The teenager's face flushed red. Well, it's my personal choice. Not everyone has to be an Elon Musk. Elon chuckled softly, taking another sip of his coffee. True, but you're not just meth Elon Musk. You're also lacking logic. Fortunately, with all those metal accessories, you might just be able to charge a Tesla, he said with a sly grin as he turned back to his table. Then you got what you deserve. The teenager's stunned silence was accompanied by muffled laughter from nearby patrons. As Elon sat back down at his table, he muttered to himself, chaotic but inefficient. Maybe a Neuralink could help. Despite his anger, the teenager couldn't let it go. He stood up and walked a few steps toward Elon's table. You know, the teenager said, furrowing his brows, guys like you, billionaires, you'll never understand what it's like for ordinary people. Maybe I'm not tearing down the system, but at least I'm resisting it. Elon stirred his coffee slowly, looking up at him. There's no need to be so dramatic, he said calmly. I used to feel like an outsider too. One day I felt the need to prove myself, but I learned something. If you really want to surprise people, work quietly and achieve something. Noise doesn't cut it. The teenager rolled his eyes. All right, spare me the motivational speech. Have you ever been judged for being different? Have people stared at you like you didn't belong? No, because you're a billionaire. Elon smiled faintly. Clearly you don't know me. I was once a kid who got bullied every day at school, spent all night coding, and had my ideas mocked for being too strange. People called me weird. And yet here I am, changing the world with that weirdness. The teenager stood silent for a moment, processing what Elon had said. Finally, he muttered, maybe not everyone is as lucky as you. His tone was softer, but still carried a hint of defiance. Elon nodded. Luck doesn't exist. There's only recognizing opportunities and acting on them. But you know what your first step to accomplishing something is? The teenager raised an eyebrow. What's that? Elon took another sip of coffee, looking the teenager up and down. Lose some of the metal accessories, because right now, they're all anyone notices about you. The teenager instinctively glanced at his bracelets and rings. Finally, he smirked slightly. Maybe you've got a point, he said with a shrug. But how do I tone it down without losing the vibe? Elon laughed, standing up and extending a hand. Start with a little balance. Expressing yourself is great, but don't draw attention for the wrong reasons. Elon, the teenager accepted the handshake. I guess you're right about that, he said. Then with a smirk, he added, but I'm still not changing my wardrobe. Elon laughed heartily. Fair enough. At least consider keeping it down in the coffee shop. The teenager rolled his eyes, but couldn't suppress a small grin. Maybe. Just maybe. With the final pat on the teenager's shoulder, Elon said, if the world doesn't understand you, try understanding it instead. Then he returned to his table. As the teenager walked out, he began removing a few of his accessories and stuffing them into his pockets. Perhaps Elon was right. Drawing a little less attention might not be such a bad idea. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more.